This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about what happens when a system stops working quietly. Not with a crash, not with an announcement, but with prices, with silence, with absence. When food becomes unreachable before power disappears, when communication vanishes before authority does, when a country is cut off, not to stop a threat, but to hide a weakness, you are told this is chaos. You are told this is unrest. But that language misses the point, because what you are watching isn't disorder. It's structure failing in the wrong order. Economic pressure arrives first. Information collapses second. And control tries to catch up last. That sequence matters a lot if you want to understand why this moment is different and why it doesn't stay contained. Stay with me, because once this pattern starts, it doesn't stop where it begins. And the next piece explains who actually holds the system now. Power does not live where you were taught to look for it. It doesn't sit in speeches. It doesn't live in uniforms. It doesn't even live in force. Real control lives upstream, in money flow, in price signals, in access. When a system functions, authority feels invisible. When it breaks, authority gets loud. What you are seeing now is not leadership asserting strength. It's a system reacting to loss of leverage. Because once an economy stops delivering basic stability, coercion becomes a substitute. And once information stops moving freely, control becomes blind. That's the pivot. The center of gravity shifts away from institutions and toward choke points. Supply, connectivity, fear. Whoever can interrupt those channels doesn't need legitimacy. They just need timing. And once control moves there, it becomes brittle, reactive, panicked, which explains why the next move is never reform. It's isolation. And once isolation becomes policy, the damage accelerates faster than authority can respond. That slow acceleration is where the real danger begins. And it didn't start yesterday. There was a time when pressure like this would have triggered alarms. Markets would have reacted early. Institutions would have adjusted. Leaders would have negotiated. That's not what happened. Instead, the system adapted in small ways. Prices crept up, subsidies thinned out. Quality declined before quantity disappeared. People adjusted, they always do. What used to be temporary became normal. What used to be alarming became routine. And what used to be unthinkable became policy. That's the silent shift. Because systems don't usually collapse when people are paying attention. They collapse when everyone has learned how to live with less. Less access, less information, less expectation. Control learned this too. Rather than fixing the economic pressure, it learned to manage perception, to slow signals, to blur cause and effect. And for a while, it worked. But slow damage compounds, and adaptation has a limit. Eventually, the gap between lived reality and official stability becomes impossible to hide. When that happens, the first visible shock is never the real crisis. It's just the symptom. And the first symptom has already arrived. Protests are exploding. Cities are in chaos. Food prices are up 70%. Inflation is over 50%. That's the symptom, not the story. Because by the time the streets fill with rage, the system is already gasping for air. Here's what you're not seeing. The financial collapse didn't happen overnight. The internet blackout didn't just begin. Those weren't mistakes. They were control measures. And now, the military is being called in, not to restore peace, but to contain what's already slipping away. These aren't isolated incidents. They're reactions. The response isn't about restoring order. It's about preserving authority. It's about stopping the cracks from becoming the flood. But here's where the system starts breaking down. You can shut off the internet, but you can't shut off the truth. You can deploy tanks, but you can't stop hunger. And once the reaction becomes the story, there's no longer a clear path to the end. This is what it looks like when a regime can't tell the difference between survival and control. And they've already crossed that line. This is where the system reveals itself. It's not about who holds the office or who wears the uniform. It's about who controls the flow. Every country has a mechanism like this, a hidden web of influence. Power doesn't operate through guns alone. It moves through trade, through data, through the control of essentials. And when all of that starts to seize, the system has to make a choice: let it collapse or maintain control at any cost. That's where things get dangerous, because the ones holding the power aren't the ones paying the price. They never do. The people are always the ones who absorb the shock. The rising food prices, the disappearing jobs, the crumbling services, and the ones in control, they learn to manipulate the situation. They leverage scarcity. They manage fear. Because when the people can't access information and can't meet their basic needs, they stop asking questions. They start asking for help. It's in that moment when external forces begin to weigh in, when survival becomes a geopolitical question, when allies become tools, and every decision becomes about maintaining power, not restoring stability. The cracks are widening fast. The protests don't stop. The violence grows. People are dying, more casualties every hour, but the regime isn't backing down. It's doubling down. They're killing the messengers, cutting communications, shutting down the internet. But the truth still finds its way out. The defection rate is rising. First, a few, now more. Soon, it will be too many. They can't control the narrative anymore. They can't stop the exodus. The whispers turn into roars. This isn't a government losing power. This is a government scrambling for survival. And the more they fight, the faster they alienate their own, the faster the damage spreads. And what happens when it all goes too far? When every action makes things worse, you get a tipping point, a breaking moment, the point of no return. And when that happens, the entire system becomes unsalvageable. What's coming isn't just a crisis. It's the unraveling of everything. Think about what you would do if everything you rely on just stopped. No food, no medicine, your job, gone. Your neighborhood, unrecognizable. You'd fight, right? You'd take to the streets. You'd demand a better life, but that's what they're already doing. These people aren't fighting for something abstract. They're fighting for survival, for their families, for their children, for the future they were promised. But here's the truth. They are not fighting alone. When a system fails, it's not just the people who suffer. It's you too. Because when these systems collapse, they send shockwaves far beyond borders. They destabilize everything. They create more problems than anyone can solve alone. You might be watching from a distance, but the consequences are closer than you think. Every day that passes, it gets harder to turn back. Every hour, more lives are caught in the chaos. And this isn't just their fight, it's ours. You can't ignore it, and you shouldn't. This isn't just a local crisis. It's already a global one. When one system breaks down like this, the ripples reach farther than anyone expects. Just look around. The world is connected in ways you can't see, and every failure has a price. Energy prices spike, trade routes are disrupted, alliances shift, and every time a nation's infrastructure falters, it becomes a breeding ground for instability, for extremism, for new threats that no one can contain. The people in the streets of Iran aren't just calling for their freedom. They're calling for the world to notice. But the world is already affected. The US has already issued threats. The EU is quietly preparing for the fallout. The Middle East is on edge, and that ripple has only just begun. The question is, who steps in, and what happens when they do? The outcome here won't just change the future of one nation. It will shape the stability of an entire region, and perhaps the balance of power across the globe. That's the real danger here. Not the violence, not the chaos, but what happens when no one knows how to stop it. Right now, there are three possible paths. First, The path of asterisk, asterisk, adjustment, asterisk, asterisk. The system recalibrates. It stabilizes. Economy and control align once again, but the price is high. Millions suffer, but the regime survives. Second, the path of asterisk, asterisk, erosion, asterisk, asterisk. Things get worse, but not fast enough to break completely. Tensions mount. Fear escalates. But the system drags on, limping forward, held together by temporary fixes and growing unrest. Finally, the path of asterisk, asterisk, rupture, asterisk, asterisk. This is the worst case scenario. A sudden, irreversible breakdown. The economy collapses, the government crumbles, the military splinters. The people are left without a system, and no one is left with the power to rebuild. No one knows which way this will go. But this is the moment when decisions are made. One of these paths will take hold, and once it does, it will be too late to stop. The difference is who has the power to steer it. Who decides when and how the clock stops ticking? And that decision is still up in the air. And now the question is, who has the power to control what happens next? Because once that tipping point is reached, it's out of anyone's hands. We don't know which path we're on yet. We don't know how this ends. But the moment we let this crisis spiral without intervention, the consequences will be irreversible. Will we look back and see this as the moment a nation slipped away? Or the moment the world stood by as it burned? If you're waiting for answers, you might be waiting too long. What's happening now is not just the fall of one regime. It's the collapse of a system that could drag the entire region and the world down with it. So ask yourself, how much longer can this last before it gets worse? The window for action is closing fast, and you need to stay ahead of what's coming, because once it accelerates, the damage will be irreversible. And by then, it will be too late.